Good morning, Brother Chad Long, Delhi Baptist Church. This is the second section in chapter 5 of Ephesians, and Paul has been talking about how we are to walk with the Lord and not with the world, how we're to apply the things he's been teaching us. And I want to remind you that one of the things that he's preparing us for is our engagement to Jesus. See, as his bride, which we are, we're to be acting as though we're engaged. If you'll think about it, and I think most of us are married, but if you're not, hopefully someday you will be. When you become engaged to someone, you don't live like you used to live. I mean, you're not dating somebody different every night, and you're not calling up. You're not supposed to be anyway. You're not calling up potential dates and trying to see what all else you can get away with. I mean, if you're engaged, you're intending to marry someone, and that's your focus, is to be the best spouse you can be and to improve in areas that'll make your future marriage better. So that being said, another way to look at what we're reading here and studying here about application is to look at the fact that as we apply these truths to our lives and we change the behaviors that need to change, we're becoming a better spouse or potential spouse for he who is to be our groom. So anyway, that wedding takes place immediately after the rapture, but in the meantime, we need to just be learning all that we can and preparing and make sure that's off. It just occurred to me that thing's liable to go off in a minute. Okay, so Ephesians chapter 5. I'll reread verse 6 and we'll move on. Paul says, "Let no man deceive you with vain words, for because of these things cometh the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience." We talked about being deceived, and there are many who will deceive you. They have their own reasons. There's some who will teach things that line their pockets. There's some that will teach things that make them famous. There's some that will teach things just for power and position. There's all different reasons why people do this, but our focus should be the truth. And if we're walking with the Lord, it will be very difficult to deceive us. I'm skeptical of almost everything and everyone anyway. I think one of the reasons that Jesus kept the holes in his hands and in his side is for identification purposes. If there's anybody else shows up trying to tell me that they're Jesus or that they've heard a word from Jesus, I'm looking for some truth out of them. I'm looking for the signs that ought to be there. Holes in the hands of the Lord. Anybody who tells me they're Jesus better have holes in their hands, and they better not be bleeding anymore. I mean, there's lots of ways we can look at this, but the main thing is just remember that vain words, and we know what vain words are. We know what vanity is. Vain words are typically the furthest thing from Jesus that can be. Jesus was never vain. He never bragged on himself. He never talked about himself as though he was something. He humbled himself and served, and he showed us who he was. And men who do not lead by example and love and serve shouldn't be able to deceive you if you know what you're looking for. He says, because of these things, the wrath of God comes the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience. Vanity and pride brings the wrath of God on people, believers and unbelievers. The unbelievers are going to get it when the Lord comes back. The believers will be chastened all throughout our lives if we belong to him. Verse 7, "Be not therefore partakers with them." So the Lord's going to punish them. We need to not be caught hanging out with that. Don't find yourself on the wrong side of these things. I want you to understand that I do not believe a saved person can lose their salvation. But I do believe, and let me just say this, in the Southern Baptist Texan, which I think most of us get, but maybe we don't all read, in the most recent paper we received, there was an article in there about a quote-unquote Christian singer. In fact, I happen to have that article. Where did Ah, look at that. I'll share this with you. It goes with what we're saying. Right there it is. Lead singer of popular Christian band says, "I no longer believe in God." John Steingard, a member of the band Hawk Nelson, wrote in an Instagram post that his disbelief in God didn't happen overnight or all of a sudden. It's been more like pulling on the threads of a sweater and one day discovering that there was no more sweater left. I won't glorify him with too much information about him, but I will say this. I've never heard of Hawk Nelson. I'm not big into contemporary music. I do hear some songs that are put out sometimes that are really touch me. But for the most part, I'm old-fashioned, and that's just my personality. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with contemporary Christian music. It just means it doesn't appeal to me particularly. But that's one of the reasons. For some of these people out there playing music and writing lyrics and seemingly love the Lord, and then one day they wake up and say, "Well, I never believed in him to start with. My parents did, and I felt pressed to." So anyway, there's a lot of pretenders. There's a lot of people who don't know him to begin with. And so what Paul's talking about here is the difference between those that are his and those that are not. And he's not talking about losing his salvation. He's talking about some who never had it to begin with. That man didn't gain his salvation and give it back. That man never knew the Lord. You can't know him and belong to him and then just one day decide you don't want to belong to him anymore. It doesn't work that way. I have children, and there's nothing that they can do to no longer be my children. And they can get mad at me all they want to. They're still mine, no matter what. And if you belong to God, you're his, and he's going to chastise his. And if you're not being chastised now and then, you don't belong to him. Anyway, he says, don't be partakers with them. We've been talking since the beginning of chapter 5 about how we're to love and walk in love as Christ did, and to be followers of God and represent God, and not to live like the world. And so Paul reiterates here, therefore be not partakers with him. For you were sometimes darkness, but now are you light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. There ought to be a distinction. There ought to be a difference. You ought to be able to look at your life and see where something changed. And you ought to walk in that newness, in that change. And you ought to be the light, not the darkness. Look, I don't know about you, but I spent enough time living in darkness. Even after I got saved, I spent enough time glorifying the devil. Now I want to glorify God. That's what we're all supposed to do. So we need to be glorifying the Lord. We need to be living as light and as examples of Jesus. Verse 9, for the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness and righteousness and truth. And that's just another way of saying the fruit of the Spirit will put us into the light and help us to reflect light. You know, I use this illustration from time to time, but the moon doesn't have any light of its own. The moon's just a big rock, you know, but it reflects the light that it receives from the sun. And that's what Christians are supposed to do, reflect the light that we receive from the sun. You don't have any light of yourself. And that's where a lot of people go wrong, is they think they do. They think they can project light that they don't themselves possess. No, we've got to take the light that the Lord shines on us and reflect it. It says, verse 10, proving what is acceptable unto the Lord. As we shine the light, we will prove acceptable things. We'll not only do them, we'll live them, and by living them, we'll prove them. Verse proving can mean testing too, and it'll encourage us to continue as we prove the Lord's love in us and for us in His light in our lives. Verse 11, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. Now you have to be careful with that word, because people read that and think it's our job to run around wagging our fingers at people, and Jesus didn't do that. The only people he really wagged his finger at were the people who claimed to be righteous, people who claimed to know better, people who claimed to be the people of God. But the unbelievers and the lost, he didn't run around wagging his finger at them. He showed them love, he showed them compassion, and he reproved them by teaching them right and by reflecting God, by showing the love and mercy of God. And when you lead somebody to Jesus, he'll do the reproving. So anyway, don't read that out of context and think we're supposed to be telling people what for. That's not what that means. But and if you do feel that you're led to do that, it would only be against those who know better. People who already know what they're doing is wrong, they need to straighten it out. But he says, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. Reprove them as a whole anyway. Don't pick out individual sinners and individual sin. Just, you need to separate ourselves from that wickedness anyway and shine the light of the Lord. So verse 12, it is a shame, for it is a shame even to speak of those things which are done to them in secret. Let me just say that the old me, the things I used to do, it's embarrassing to talk about. When you're trying to reflect the Lord and honor the Lord, you don't have any business talking about the wickedness and filth that you used to be mired in. I mean, you're not doing the Lord any favors by bragging about or talking about the old you. I mean, the old you should be dead, and you let the dead stay dead. You don't dig them up and play with them. There, anyhow. But that's what that's talking about. Just don't have any fellowship with unfruitful works of darkness, and they are unfruitful. If the light leaves the sun and it heads out into outer space and doesn't reflect back, then it was unfruitful. It didn't help anybody. That light just went on into the darkness, and the darkness swallows it up. The only time that light is harnessed and becomes fruitful is when it's reflected back for the usage of those within its beams. And that's how we're supposed to be. We can't be useful if we're in darkness and we're not reflecting back the light. And it's just another way that he's wording this. But he says, it's a shame to even speak of those things which are done to them in secret, but all things that are reproved are made manifest by the light. Now, another word for reproved here could be discovered. All these things will be shown by light. When you shine light on something, it'll show you the truth of it. When I need to see something really closely, I'm working on, when I'm trying to mechanic, one of my best tools, one of my favorite tools, is a little pocket flashlight that's really bright that I keep here in my shirt pocket. And when I need a bigger light, I've got some bigger lights for that. But there's no mechanic in the world who can get anything done without a good bright light, because sometimes to discover the problem, you've got to be able to see clearly. And so the light of Jesus, as it reflects off of us, will show in our own lives things that need to be revealed, but also in the world around us. I can tell you that the closer I get to the Lord, the more He shows me the things I can see around me that we've got to know about them so that we can make the changes that are necessary. All things that are reproved are made manifest by the light. That means they're revealed by the light. The truth is shown by the light. For whatsoever doth make manifest is light. Anything that brings about truth is from God, and therefore originates in light, the light of the Lord. Verse 14, wherefore he saith, awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. There's a part of this is actually quoting somewhere else we'll get into tomorrow. But for the moment, suffice it to say, in fact, I think there's a part of this, a reference to John chapter 3, but we'll look at that later. When he says, awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee the light. First of all, we can't wake ourselves up. The Lord's got to be the one to wake us up. What he's saying is, those of you who have the Lord in you that are stifling that, you need to open your eyes. The Lord, well, I'll put it this way: the Lord can shine light at us all He wants to, but if we just intentionally keep our eyes closed, you don't see the light. One of my favorite conversations with my wife in the middle of the night is, if there's any light on. I mean, my wife likes it pitch black when we sleep. If there's a TV light on, and I don't mean it being on, I mean the little light at the bottom that's blue or red that lets you know it's on or off. Just a little indigo light. Excuse me. New babies don't let us sleep very well. But they're just little lights around the room or coming from another room, no matter how slight or how small, they bother her. And I get it. I get tickled at her. I'll say, well, you know, I don't think they'd bother you if your eyes were closed. I mean, you can't see them if your eyes are closed. And she swears she can, but I don't believe her. When my eyes are closed, I don't see any light. I can have light shined at me, and I may know it's being shined at me, but I don't see it. If my eyes are closed, I'm not seeing the light. Now, there are bright enough lights, I guess, that you couldn't avoid them. But, I mean, one good example of this, what I'm trying to say in verse 14 is, just when, wake up, open your eyes, see what the Lord's trying to tell you and apply it. He says, awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. I want to talk more about that tomorrow. He's quoting somewhere else, and I want to get into what he's saying. But what he's trying to tell us believers is that we're supposed to walk a certain way, behave a certain way, and reflect a certain way. And we do that by, first of all, or understanding where it originates from, and then being willing to put into practice the things we've learned, and to help others to come to the knowledge and understanding of the Lord. Lost people become found because we shine light on them, and we reveal the truth to them. And backslidden Christians stop rejecting the things that they know in their heart, and they begin to accept the truth and follow the Lord again. And those are two different categories. When I was lost, I didn't know I was lost. I was completely undone. I was doomed. And somebody had to tell me how I could be saved. Once I got saved, I wished I could just tell you everything went perfect from then on, but it didn't. I knew something was different. I knew I had the Lord in my heart, and I knew there were times when I was convicted for the way I was living. But I still needed to wake up. I was walking around like a sleeping person. It's almost like a transition, and I don't know that I can infer this from this text, but I can infer it from the Bible as a whole and my studies of it. You put it this way. They say people on death row are dead men walking. I mean, they're headed to their execution at some point, and they're dead men walking. Let me just tell you that there's 3 stages, I guess, of life. Lost people are like dead people. They're like dead men walking. They're headed to hell. There's literally no hope outside of Jesus. I mean, they're doomed. Like a person on death row, unless the governor steps in or somebody advocates for this person, they are doomed to go through with the sentencing that was given to them as far as punishment for their crime. They're headed straight to to their death, their final destination, I guess, unless somebody intervenes. And that's a picture of a lost person. Sometimes after you've been advocated for and somebody's gone to the trouble of getting you out of that situation, you accept the Lord as your Savior, but you don't immediately begin to understand what all those, like the new baby we just brought home. You're just not completely aware of what it is you've done. You're no longer headed to your death, but you're not walking in light yet either. There's this period of sleep, I guess you could say. So you go from being a dead person walking to a sleepwalker. Now you're saved. You've accepted Christ as your Savior, and you know enough to know that He's promised to save you, and you've accepted that. But you're just kind of walking around like sleepwalking in the world, halfway in, halfway out. And then there's walking in the light, and that's when you take your salvation, you begin to use it for something. You begin to apply it and honor God with it. And so those are the stages. And what Paul's trying to tell the Ephesians is, look, you can be like those dead people, and then you have to question whether or not you were ever saved to begin with. Living in fornication and these other sins he mentioned and earlier in this chapter and in the last chapter. If you're living like that, then you're probably never saved to begin with. You don't have any conviction. You probably never got saved to start with. You're a dead man walking, or you're one of these baby Christians who's a lot like my new son is right now. He don't even know he's here. He eats and he sleeps and he's uses the bathroom. He don't even know he's here. He's just kind of sleeping along, you know. Or you can be like, well, as I've come to be now, or better even than me. But you're aware, you're awake, you're growing, and you're trying, and you want to walk in the light that the Lord shines on us. These are the things Paul's trying to make us aware of. You're going to find yourself in one of those three categories. He puts it a little differently in one of the Corinthian letters, but the same thing. He basically says there's three types of people. There's a natural man, there's the carnal man, and there's a spiritual man. Natural man is dead man walking. Carnal man is a believer who just has not gotten these things out of his life, and spiritual man is the one who's allowing the light of the Lord to reflect in him. So anyway, I think I've belabored the point hopefully to where everybody's gotten it and understands what I'm saying, what Paul's trying to say here. We'll revisit this tomorrow and we'll expound on it a little bit. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.